Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking an ancient account that reads less like a dusty historical log and way more like an epic, slow-burn thriller. Imagine a young Earth, fresh and new, yet somehow already deeply infected by corruption. We're talking about a time when violence, intense greed, and the flash of sharp knives were spreading across humanity as quickly and as commonly as wild grass. But right in the middle of this rapid, chaotic decay, the source text describes a divine sign given to the world. And it wasn't a flashy lightning bolt or a massive earthquake. It was a sign so quiet, yet so incredibly massive, that humanity literally couldn't ignore it, even if they tried.
Okay, let's dive into this. 969. That is, for sure, a biologically impossible number of birthday candles. But according to the ancient texts, this is the exact number of years a man named Methuselah lived. For centuries, people have stared at this massive number, kind of just treating it as biological trivia or maybe a mythical exaggeration. But when we actually take a step back and analyze the narrative surrounding it, well, this number instantly sets up the core mystery of the whole story.
So what does this all mean? The source material presents a really fascinating narrative pivot right here. This account isn't just handing us some biological anomaly, it's presenting a profound living symbol of patience. Methuselah's incredibly long life wasn't just about outliving everybody else. It was a literal, breathing countdown. Every single year he survived was another year of divine grace in a world that was rapidly tearing itself apart.
Let's trace how this builds across the generational timeline. We start with Enoch, a man who the text says walked with God in a world that was sprinting in the opposite direction. He has a son, Methuselah, whose very existence becomes the warning. Then comes Lamech, a man totally weary from the agonizing weight of watching the world decay all around him. And finally Noah, whose name actually means comfort. As we move through this lineage, just keep in mind that each of these generations carried the excruciating burden of watching time march forward while their society spiraled into total chaos.
Section 1. A world falling apart.
The text describes early human settlements, essentially rotting from the inside out. Doing wrong just became the new normal. And there's a really stark contrast to notice here. On one side, you have the corrupted world, the constant, deafening noise of hammers, unchecked greed, casual violence everywhere. On the other side, you have Enoch's response, which was this heavy, deliberate silence. He would retreat to a windy hill, far away from the noise, just listening to an unseen presence. And it was actually during this time that Enoch had a terrifying prophetic dream, a really vivid vision of water rising up and swallowing absolutely everything.
Surrounded by mockers and a society that absolutely despised his peaceful way of living, Enoch gave this incredibly solemn response, "I just want to live truthfully." But time doesn't stop. To mark the passing of this unstoppable time, the text points out a recurring physical motif. Enoch began placing stones in a line on that windy hill. It was this highly tangible way to count the days of God's patience, reminding himself that every single moment was a gift and that one day, time was going to run out.
Section 2. Enoch's mysterious disappearance.
So, as the world grew louder and more chaotic, Enoch grew increasingly distant. Until one evening, he went out to his hill and simply didn't come back. His son Methuselah and the villagers searched the entire night, but they found absolutely nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle, just footsteps that ended abruptly. And this brilliantly illustrates the deep, ancient fear that gripped the village. I mean, if the Creator could just pluck a righteous man away without a single trace, he could undoubtedly reach right down and judge the entire corrupted world.
Section 3. Methuselah, the living countdown.
This sudden vanishing dropped an unimaginable burden squarely onto Methuselah's shoulders. Left behind as a living witness, he had to watch generations pass while horrific violence became just a daily habit. And he actually kept his father's physical motif going. Methuselah continually visited that same windy hill to add new stones to the line, literally physically counting the days of divine patience. Every stone was a marker, a heavy, tangible reminder that the sky's invisible clock was still ticking while the world below spiraled completely out of control. The text recalls a pretty heavy exchange from Methuselah's youth. Looking down at the smoke of constant, endless conflicts rising from the settlements, a young Methuselah asked his father, Enoch, "How long will God tolerate this?" And Enoch replied with just chilling clarity, "As long as necessary, but not forever." So the crucial point is this. Methuselah realized that his unprecedented, massive lifespan wasn't actually a reward for good behavior. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't a reward at all. It was a ticking clock. His 969 years represented the Creator actively stretching out time, giving humanity every possible agonizing second to turn back from their violence before the inevitable end arrived.
Decades turn into centuries. Methuselah's son, Lamech, grows up in a world where people are practically selling their souls for scraps of land and glorifying pure cruelty. Lamech is just exhausted by the whole shebang. When his own son is born, a weary Lamech looks down at the child and says, "I hope this child brings peace to our hard lives." He names the boy Noah, which literally means comfort or peace.
Section 4. Noah and the Ark.
Noah grew up very different, deliberately holding back from a society that was pushing every possible boundary. The text says he received a direct command to build an impossible refuge right there on dry land. The whole process was completely surreal. First, you have the absolute agonizing labor of constructing this massive wooden frame. Second, enduring the relentless, cruel mockery from neighbors who thought it was hilarious watching an old man build a giant boat in the dirt. But then comes the third step, the inexplicable, completely silent arrival of the animals, walking right past those stunned, suddenly very quiet mockers.
And as this impossible structure finally nears completion, the very atmosphere itself starts to change. An incredibly old Methuselah climbs the hill one last time. His hands are trembling, and not just from his age, but from the terrifying realization of what is finally happening. He places his final stone. He looks down at the completed ark, looks up at a sky that's turning the suffocating color of burnt brass, and realizes the excruciating 969-year wait is over. Time has officially run out.
Section 5. The Final Judgment.
The air grew incredibly heavy. Without any grand ceremony, Noah and his family stepped inside, leaving their old lives and a completely unrepentant world behind. Then the massive wooden doors shut, miraculously sealed tight. And then, absolutely nothing happens. For 7 agonizing days, the ark just sits there on dry land in this heavy, suffocating silence. Outside, people likely went right back to their normal lives, probably laughing one last time at the giant wooden box. But on the 7th day, the sky turns to ash. The clouds don't just gather, they literally collapse. The text describes an outbreak of water that was absolutely not normal rain. It was this heavy, dark deluge falling like crushing stones, carrying the ancient, damp smell of the deep earth.
But here's the crazy part. The destruction wasn't just coming from above. The text explicitly notes that the very earth itself fractured. Violent waters erupted from below. That same ground that had absorbed centuries of human violence and bloodshed was now violently returning it in the form of an overwhelming, chaotic flood from right underneath their feet. The scale of the destruction was absolute.
In a moment of just tragic, terrifying irony, the exact same people who had spent decades throwing stones and laughing at Noah were now slipping in the rising mud, desperately banging their bloody hands against the wooden hull. "Noah, open the door! Please open!" they begged. They were crying out for the very mercy they had mocked for centuries. But the door remained shut. The time for refuge had firmly passed.
Which brings us to the core thesis of this entire ancient account. God delayed because he was patient, not because he was weak. Methuselah's 969-year lifespan was the ultimate, living proof of divine patience before inevitable judgment. He lived for almost a millennium as a ticking clock, watching in complete silence as humanity wasted their chance, right up until the very first drops of rain fell.
This story leaves us with a heavy resonance, one that really bridges the ancient world and ours. It's not just a story about a massive flood, it's really a story about the profound weight of time. So I want to leave you with this. If your life was a countdown, totally visible for all to see, what would you build with the time you've been given? Think about that.